Good morning, everybody. About a month ago, I talked about Sacred Fist and I talked about Stormsinger, and I was like, yo, these characters are amazing, and I can't wait to talk about Dark Apostate. Well, it's been like a month, so let's talk about Dark Apostate. You see, Dark Apostate is one of the coolest ideas they came out with. A necromantic cleric, you turn yourself into like a cool shadow shroud, you have all these curses and stuff, and I was so stoked to play Dark Apostate. I played 3 actually. 2 different kinds on Hardcore League and 1 on the regular servers. I played 2-handed fighter, 2-weapon fighter, and spellcaster. And overall, my impression of Dark Apostate is that it is extremely cool, it is very unique, and I love the ideas, but it's just a little weak. The best way I can describe it is that everything about Dark Apostate oozes style. From the different forms to the whole cursing mechanic, the different abilities you can use. The problem is the damage is just a smidgen undertuned, so if you want to make this your mainstay tree, honestly, it's not that great. For the most part, I ended up using Divine Disciple pretty much exclusively during the leveling process. I did end up taking the stuff out of Dark Apostate in terms of, especially for the spellcasting, with the cursing effects and the damage applied to Bane and Prayer, which are actually pretty good, but the damage is low. It's like really, really low. I ended up just investing in the Divine Disciple first, using that stuff, getting that several levels, and then later on just getting the Bane and Prayer stuff as kind of like an added piece. Once I got to Epics, I really didn't notice the damage on the abilities that much, and I was mostly just using Prayer as an offensive effect because by using Prayer, you're able to reduce the monster's saving throws. And that's where I think where this character really shines. Dark Apostate is a very, very competent and comfortable debuffer, able to remove a whole bunch of enemies' saving throws by the use of Prayer and Curse, both of which have no save as a Dark Apostate. And on top of that, you can also stack Shadows upon you from the Exalted Angel tree to gain minus 15 saving throws on enemies. And that's not including anything anyone else does, such as the Aura of Menace from a Favorite Soul or a Warlock, or somebody using Thunder Snow to reduce monsters' reflex saves by half of your character level, so it'd be an extra 16. You could have monsters having their saves being reduced by almost 40, which is really, really nuts. And I think that this character excels in that avenue. It's effectively what I was doing once I got to endgame. Yeah, I was doing some damage. The negative stuff is cool. Being able to heal yourself with negative is interesting. But the thing is, clerics already get the regular healing, so it's not really that important. You do get some negative amplification, which is not too bad. And I will say that the defensive bonuses of the negative form are super valuable. Being able to have access to fortifications, you're not getting critically hit as often, is really nice. Also, just general immunities. Oh no, there's a monster coming at me, and it's going to hit me with a poison. Nope. Disease? Nada. Negative effects? Who cares? So for general purposes, the leveling felt pretty good, but again, it was mostly because I was playing as a cleric. Now, there's a lot of different domain choices. I decided to go with what I thought would be the best in terms of luck domain because the concealment stacks with the form, so my character basically had a super high concealment the entire process, and it felt pretty good overall, plus getting bonuses to DCs and no fail saving throws on a 1. Honestly, I really enjoyed it and I had a good time with it. You got a lot of flexibility in terms of your domain, unless you decide to go melee, at which point your only option is the war domain, but, just kind of deal with it. I think the main problem with Dark Apostate is the fact that you are required to use a favored weapon, but the favored weapon flexibility of Cleric is not that high. When you play as a Paladin, you have the option to get extra favored weapons out of your Knight of the Chalice tree, which means you can be a lot more flexible in what weapon you decide to use. But as a Cleric, you only get to pick your religion, a lot of which are locked behind certain races, which means if you want to use a 2-handed fighter, it's either be a Warforged and use Greatsword, or use Quarterstaff. Now, Quarterstaffs are not a bad weapon, but that might not be ideal. What if you want to use a Falchion? You could go a Wood Elf, but now you got to spend 12 points in Wood Elf to get Falchion, and you probably want to be Wisdom and Damage, so you're spending 12 points in Falconry, and so you just end up spending a bunch of points in other places and not actually the Dark Apostate tree, and you ask yourself the question, why am I even doing melee with this tree when I could just use one of these other trees instead? And I think that's kind of the issue right now, is it just doesn't have the big draw. I'm hoping that Dark Apostate receives a damage buff in the future. The buffs I would like to see added in the tree would be something along the lines of the base damage on the cursing effect being added up to, instead of being a D4, which then gets upgraded to a D6 in tier 5, making it at least a D6 as a base, or hopefully a rounded one, so a D3 plus 3 as the base damage, up to a D4 plus 4 as the upgraded damage, just that it's a little bit higher and you don't have those extreme lows. I found the lows were really unfortunate, where sometimes you just hit the monster with a spell and it really doesn't do a whole lot because you rolled low, and it's really pronounced in the early game, which kind of sucks. You don't really notice it as much in the later game because you stop casting those spells, but there's that. And then the base damage on the Dark Apostate dice could stand to come up either to a D8 or just have a scaling upgrading system where it starts at a D6, then becomes a D8, then becomes a D10, then becomes a D12 or whatever it is, just like Eldritch Knight. Because right now it just kind of does a little bit worse than Eldritch Knight, and that's obviously not ideal. Now granted, it does have the benefit of being evil damage, which is largely untyped. No monsters in the entire video game resist it. So instead of making it scale up the same way, just being a D8 instead of a D6 would be a major draw. But at the end of the day, I think that Dark Apostate is really cool, really interesting, and really unique, but what carried me through the process was Divine Disciple, Domains, and just the fact that Cleric is a really, really strong class. So should you play Dark Apostate? I mean, honestly, it's not bad. Like, the class is just really good. So you're going to have a good time no matter what. And I think that's kind of the lesson here. Cleric is very strong. So the fact that Dark Apostate maybe doesn't stand out as much doesn't mean that there's any real problem with this actual character archetype. But unlike Sacred Fist, where you felt those effects right away, where the Sacred Fist abilities felt really good and impactful, where all of a sudden the lightning strikes coming down from Stormsinger felt really good and impactful, a lot of the Dark Apostate stuff is just so overshadowed by the other good things in Cleric. And I'm not asking for a nerf in Cleric. Cleric is going to underperform Alchemist, Sorceress, and Druid, but it would be nice if Dark Apostate just got a little bit of a buff to be kind of amped up to that level. Now, if you want to hear a little bit more about the details about how to make a character like this, just pay attention to me with the build. Being the absolute best kind of undead cleric is hard work, and it's done no better than by the Dark Apostate. Now, while the Dark Apostate is an interesting character, there's a few different ways you can build it. I'm going to try to outline a lot of them here to kind of give you some good places to start. But in general, the first thing you want to figure out is what your main stat's going to be. If you're any type of spellcaster, Wisdom is obviously the main stat you need for everything. However, if you would like to be a melee character, you can either go Wisdom, Charisma, or Strength. The benefit to Strength is that it allows you to use two-handed fighting very easily and scales your damage straight up. It just doesn't leave you with much Wisdom for spellcasting, so it's more of a secondary thing. If you go with Wisdom, then your character will have the ability to do spellcasting and also melee damage, but you'll be missing out on a lot of enhancement points. You'll have to spend a lot of enhancement points, so just keep that in mind. And finally, you have the Charisma option. You could actually build your character fully as Charisma. The benefit to doing so is that you get access to the better use of the Charisma transfer melee from the War Priest tree. But the downside is you still have to take Charisma and damage from Fate Arc Illusionist. And also, it doesn't really do anything other than turns. So there's a few options. That's one of the reasons why melee is a little bit more complicated. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to be sticking mostly to spell casting. Now, as far as your skills go, it's a Cleric, Heal, Spellcraft are the only ones you need. Diplomacy I just took, and Concentration because I had extra skill points. Heal and Diplomacy, that's all you really want. Anything else other than that is kind of unimportant. As far as the feats go, you're a spellcaster, so you want to take all the meta magic feats, maximize Quicken and Power for your spell-like abilities. On top of that, for the spellcasting feats, I took Spell Focus and Greater Spell Focus for both Evocation and Necromancy. I played as a human, so I had some extra feats. You don't necessarily have to do that, but you can if you want to, so that is also an option. However, for epic feats, I also thought it would be a good idea to grab Ruin and Greater Ruin, because this character, its one main flaw, its weakness, is single target damage. You need to be able to deal damage to a single target, and that's something this character doesn't do well. So Ruin and Greater Ruin make really good endgame options for spells, which is kind of nice. However, Cleric Domain is another thing I want to talk about, and Deity. In general, your deity isn't super important if you're a spellcaster. Pick whatever you want. I went with Orion because it gives Orion's instructions for a bonus +4 to Wisdom on command. But if you want to be a melee, obviously make sure you pick a deity that gives you the weapons you need, because your character does need to be using a favored weapon to get some of the benefits from the actual tree itself, Dark Apostate. However, domains. I decided to go with Luck Domain. I think there's a couple of good contenders here for Dark Apostate. Luck Domain was the one I went with because I think that getting access to displacement is really good. By having access to displacement and being in the shadow form, my character has the silly property of 100% concealment, or minus a bunch of numbers in terms of effective hit points. That's because the game has an overflower and it doesn't know how to handle this. So you might be asking yourself, how good is 100% concealment? It's surprisingly okay. It's not that great. In low Reaper mode or in elite difficulty, you will feel very, very good dodging almost every single attack, unless a monster has True Seeing, of course, which does happen. Some casters will cast on themselves, and champions. All the elemental champions have True Seeing, Marks of Law, a whole bunch of champions, about half of them have True Seeing. So
It'll happen a lot. On top of that, a lot of bosses have built-in true seeing. Raid bosses have built-in true seeing. Raid monsters will have built-in true seeing, such as the Orthon's Vision of Destruction. They don't say they have it. Turns out they do. So it's a very wacky property. So is it good to have 100% concealment? I don't know. But that doesn't stop me from recommending Luck Domain Cleric. I think it's great for this character because you get access to no fail saves in a 1 as well as +2 to all DCs. Other favorable options, Sun Domain gives you light and fire spell power as well as some really good spell-like abilities for leveling. The Magic Domain gives you a ton of universal spell power, again that you cast like a whole bunch of different spells. Mana and universal spell power plus DCs is always good. Death Domain is nice because you get a Necrotic Ray spell-like ability, Destruction spell-like ability, and more Necromancy DCs, which is nice. And then finally, you've got Animal Domain if you need some extra hit points, which is also pretty good. That's pretty much where it would go with these. If you're playing a melee, you only get one option, which is War Domain. If you're a Vistani, then you don't need War Domain. So you're playing like Vistani and you're using the deity feat for Blood of All, then maybe that's okay. But you're going to be mostly looking at War Domain if you're a melee cleric because it gives you Holy Sword at 14, which you need for your physical damage. As far as the spells go, reminder that Dark Apostates get all of the Inflict spells for free added to their list as opposed to Cures. So if you want to be able to heal your friends, you will have to take Cure spells along the leveling process. Even if you don't take most of them, you should pretty much always take Heal. This is just generally useful for hirelings or other people in your party, so just make sure you have that one. In terms of valuable spells, I didn't really use Inflict Light Mass, but Inflict Moderate's pretty good. And then I started using Inflict Serious and Inflict Critical the majority of the time. This character's damage mostly came from the spell-like abilities out of Divine Disciple actually during the leveling process, until eventually later I was able to pick up more abilities like Holy Smite here as a spell I was casting pretty regularly, and then moving up into Comet Fall, and then Firestorm, Celestial Bombardment, and stuff in the later levels. And have all the good defensive abilities. You don't need Death Ward, but it's nice to have for your friends. You don't really need Freedom of Movement, but it's nice to have for your friends. You don't really need True Seeing, but again, it's nice to have for your friends. Now let's talk enhancements for a second. So this is the tree. You got a couple different options here. You got, I went human as I said, but this is the Dark Apostate tree. It's split into two different parts. You've got the melee section here with all the Dark Apostate curse dice, and you have all the weird spell castery stuff as well. So it's kind of hard to evaluate this tree. Overall, I think that it has some good things in it. The cores are pretty much universally good, and the Master of Shadows capstone is quite nice. This 5% crit ability is really, really strong, and this Pray for Mercy effect is interesting, although it's not very good. And that's exactly why when you start playing this character, I'm going to recommend Divine Disciple. I know this sounds counterintuitive because you're playing a Dark Apostate. You're going to be leveling as a Dark Apostate. Your character's going to say Dark Apostate. But it turns out Divine Disciple is actually just too good to avoid using. The first thing I did on this character is I ran up Divine Disciple. I picked up Searing Light spell-like ability and Holy Smite, so I had this by level 6. And I just slammed Empower, Maximize, Quicken into it, and just blew up monsters along the way because it was just too good to avoid. Once I had that, basically set up almost exactly like this, then I started spending my points in a Dark Apostate. Didn't even really turn into an Undead Cleric until like level 8 or so, because it's just too good to use Holy Smite over everything else, which is, again, one of the big problems with Dark Apostate. It's just that it's not that there's a conceptual problem. The abilities are interesting. You've got the Bane ability, which allows you to, or you got Bane, which you can have extra damage apply onto it. Prayer, which you can have damage apply onto it. The Curse, which doubles the damage. You've got the Dark Apostate. It's just all a little under-tuned. D4 damage is just not enough. Even with Maximize and Empower, you're hitting monsters for 20. And 20 is not enough damage to kill kobolds, right? So this is unscaled damage to the extreme. This is less damage than pre-buff Burning Hands. So it's really, really rough in terms of the amount of damage that it does. It's very, very low. This should be a D6 or at least a D3 plus 3, so it's like a rounded number maybe. That would be nice. And then Shadows of Death has the same problem. It upgrades to a D6, but by the time you get a D6, you're level 12. It's not enough damage, so it's a bit tough here. It's not bad, and it does help out during the leveling process since you get the spell-like ability Prayer, since you get the spell-like ability Bane, and you can empower, maximize, and quicken these spell-like abilities. But again, that is like a little bit of an issue for that one. So here's really what I recommend for this path if you do want to play a Dark Apostate, similar to what I did. As I said, Divine Disciple, get that the tier 4 up here, get the Holy Smite. This is what you rush first. Don't put any points in this tree. All into Divine Disciple as you see fit, get up there. Then once you have that Dark Apostate, you can start putting some points in here. grab the Bane, the Prayer, as well as Pray for Mercy. I took this effect here, Dark Rewards. When you critically hit, you get temporary spell points. This basically means that your Prayer and Bane are free. You're almost always going to critically hit with these spells on a pack of monsters, so they effectively become free with temporary spell points, which is kind of cool. I'm not a melee, so I didn't take the Apostate's Curse, but if you're a melee, you'd want to take this. Again, it suffers from the same scaling problem as this one, which is a d6 damage per strike is really not very much. Whereas what was it, like an Eldritch Knight actually managed to get a whole bunch of extra dice. They're d12s. This character stays on d6s the entire time, and so you're doing about half the damage of an Eldritch Knight. So while you do have the benefit of having a unique damage type in terms of evil, it's still not very good. So it just needs to be bumped up, maybe to a d8, maybe had better spell power scaling, something like that to really give it that oomph that it needs. Yeah, I went Divine Disciple, and then I went into Dark Apostate and started taking all this stuff. Abilities that are great. Benediction, absolutely fantastic, because it gives you the spell power scaling on harm, so you can use this to pretty much fully heal yourself through the entire process. I would do quests on Reaper 3 and 4, and 1 harm is full health pretty much all the time. Great ability. Then you've got DCs, which is amazing, obviously. The crit, as I said. And finally, this ability, Ward of Shadow. I don't know why it displays a stub. Reference video of unfinished content that was talking about. This grants temporary immunity to multiple targets, all forms of alignment-based energy for 1 minute. It's basically protection from alignment. It's actually very good. Really useful spell, and because it's a spell-like ability, it's got a pretty short cooldown and a low cost, so you can cast this all the time. Great effect. Works really well if you go into Primal Avatar, which I didn't do, but you could go into Primal Avatar to really bump up this and make this stronger. And then I know what to do with the rest of my points. So I would say this is probably the baseline, what you need. The rest of it, you can do whatever you want. I went Fade Arc Illusionist and picked up Greater Color Spray, which was pretty much only used in Epics. I didn't use that during the Heroic process, which I probably should have, but that's not the point. Greater Color Spray is really, really nice in Epics. It just allows you to have crowd control. One of the main issues with the Cleric is making monsters helpless. You can hold a single monster with hold percent at level 2. You can use Greater Command to stop monsters from moving or Comet Fall, but you can't make them helpless, and this actually does that, so it was nice for that. 1 point on War Priest just gives some spell power. Just seemed like it was okay. And then Human, these are my racial points. The race really doesn't matter. You can drop, the Human here, and instead of taking Human, grab Asmar, and then instead of taking Greater Spell Focus, Evocation, and Necromancy, because you get the extra 2 Wisdom over there, and you lose the feat, you could take a different feat. A lot of flexibility in terms of how you would want to do that. You do need Evocation and Necromancy, though. You cast a bunch of Evocation and Necromancy. You can't really go all in on one. There's not enough spells just for that, because Cleric has no 9th level damaging Necromancy spells, which is unfortunate. But you do have 9th level damaging Evocation spells, so you're always going to be split Necro and Evocation. There's no real way to kind of get around that. Now let's talk Epic Destinies. I decided to go with Draconic Incarnation. I thought it would be the best one. Draconic Incarnation has the... just a bunch of damage. I actually went with Lightning for leveling. I think you would swap Cold for the end game, just because the Cold can synergize pretty well with some of the items. There's a lot of negative and cold items that kind of have all their stats into one place. It might seem counterintuitive not to pick negative here, since you do scale negative damage, and it would be Necromancy. But the problem is a lot of monsters are immune to negative. So you need something that is going to cut through, because if you don't have that, then you're going to find yourself in situations where there's constructs or there's undead. You just decide to go into Ravenloft, and then all of a sudden, you're not going to be able to do anything to half of the monsters unless you picked Cold, at which point now it's like, oh, Scarecrows? Cool, Dragon Burst, and you're all set, or Energy Burst. So that's what I did there. Also, you can get access to Ruin Intensified. So as I said, I would recommend Ruin and Greater Ruin. This character's biggest problem is single target damage. So Ruin and Greater Ruin here, giving you a ton of additional damage per strike. Don't worry about the spell point cost, though, because you don't really need to think about that one. You've got a lot of spell points in this character, given your different spell-like abilities you have, so you can kind of be flexible with that one. However, Shadow Dancer. So this is just, I wanted something to show off. If you want to get 100% concealment, this is how you do it. It's with Shadow Form here. There's an upgrade, Depths of Darkness, that has stacking concealment. The incorporeality is not stacking, so it tells you it doesn't, but the concealment is, and that's what gives you 100. 25% from Dark Apostate, 25% from the Depths of Darkness, and 50% from Displacement is 100%. This is not a good build. 75% is enough. If you just decide to go with Displacement, you will find yourself very, very tanky, but you could go for the full 100% if you really wanted to. Instead, what I would recommend with this is to probably go Fatesinger. I went Fatesinger for the mana cost reduction. You're picking up spell power, you're picking up some extra stuff, but it's mostly the 10% spell cost reduction as well as enchantment, so this can be helpful. However, if you want to do something else, Primal Avatar is also not a bad option, being able to pick up Weathering the Elements, so the protection from energy spell gets buffed up, and so does your protection from alignment spell, which is kind of convenient. On top of that, you can get some extra DCs here as well, picking up both evocation as well as the intelligence, wisdom, charisma here. I ended up going for the necromancy out of the draconic incarnation tree so that I have the flexibility with my second tree and not having to worry about which one I had at any given moment. So between the two, that's probably where I'd go. Exalted Angel is the third tree. I haven't filled out the points yet because I'm still like this character's not level 32, oddly enough. But once you fill it out, I really like Shadows Upon You because this character has some cool abilities that's kind of like you can combine. The big notable combination here is Cursed Words. It's a spell-like ability out of Dark Apostate right here. That is a no-save curse. So you curse an enemy for -4 to saves. Then at level 30, you hit him with Prayer. So you walk him next to the monster and you cast Prayer. So they lose -6 to all of their saves. And then you cast Turn Undead, which reduces the monster save by another 5, making them lose 15 to their saving throws, which is a very, very large amount. It basically means that if you're doing R10s, there's a Despair Reaper, there's all sorts of other stuff going on, you can drop the saves dramatically. So if you're somebody who's in a group where maybe you're with your friends, you're doing R6s, R7s, you're trying to get into it, and you don't really know what the best way is to kind of crowd control monsters, maybe your sorcerer can't always land the holds, doing something like this, -15, is absolutely massive. So if you're thinking about that, that's a good combination. So I think that's what I would go. Shadows Upon You plus Bane plus Curse Words. Obviously the Curse Words is only on one target, but you can like pick the Champ, you can pick the Reaper, you can pick whatever's in the pack. But outside of that, you just walk up, hit Prayer, hit Turn, and then walk away, and you're going to be there. But since you're already there, hit Prayer, hit the Turn, and then launch in the Energy Burst, kill most things possibly, and then you're moving on to the next room. So again, you've got a lot of flexibility there. I think it's very cool, very useful for bosses as well, especially bosses that have high evasion or things like that for some of your party members. I don't recommend the Mantle. The Draconic Mantle does way more damage, and that's what you're going to want to be using in the first place. Anyway, that's what I got about Dark Apostate. Dark Apostate is just undertuned. The concept is very cool. It is very unique. I love the way the form looks. I love the way the imbue looks. The character is fun to play. The actual abilities are intuitive, and I love the way the combination of like the no-save curses and the prayers to the saves and the debuffing, it really puts like a different angle on the game. It just doesn't do enough damage to feel good. You find yourself mostly using Divine Disciple abilities or regular cleric spells or domain spells. The Dark Apostate stuff just never really comes to the forefront. It doesn't need to be the best, but it definitely shouldn't feel so bad that you don't even want to cast it. So I'm hoping that Saints Games will buff it. Pray for Mercy needs, like I said, a 50% damage buff straight up. You know, move this up to a D6 or a D3 plus 3. Move this up to a D8 or a D4 plus 4. That would be amazing. Increase this up to like a D8 maybe, and it'll feel a lot better and be a lot more cohesive. But until then, that's pretty much all we got. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. So thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, then please Dark Apostate this video. I mean, subscribe and get ready for the next build that I got coming for you in the future. But as it stands, I have to go fade away now. So goodbye. I'm fading away. Oh no, I'm fading away. Oh no.